Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to be back in. Bradford, city of dreams. I love that. BBC have got it spot on, I think. I want to begin my presentation by trying to identify three types of producer city. And for the third type, I want to set out what I've called a manifesto-led identity. Hope that doesn't sound too pompous. But you'll see, because of the self-opinionated nature of this manifesto, that was probably the only way of describing it. And I want to do that and structure it around 10 propositions, if I don't run out of time. So looking down from 10 miles up, we might be able to identify three distinct types of producer city. The traditional city, which you're all familiar with, I guess, the traditional industrial city, the modern producer city, and what I'm calling the advanced producer city, which is work in progress. Don't take these dates too seriously, by the way, as you'll see if you've managed to read it. So type 1, traditional producer city, from the beginnings of industrialization through to Britain as workshop of the world in the 19th century. The business model for which underpins this massively successful mode of production was a kind of top-down paternalistic culture with levels of education just sufficient for routine work in big factories and for a few well-educated professional, technical and management people. The apogee, oh sorry, I missed one out there. The apogee of these, of this particular traditional producer city, although there were changes of pace and character during this 175 years of urban development, probably the peak of all-round performance was what we might call the Keynesian New Deal city, which occurred for maybe 2 or 3 decades immediately after the Second World War. During this period, there was on the whole a substantially organized working class, which was reasonably well paid and cared for, relatively good social welfare provision, but importantly, successive government commitment to full employment. We can get a kind of coarse-grained overview of how successive industrial waves have changed urban geography from this Kondratiev cycle, showing how the underlying mode of production actually determines our urban geography. Kondratiev, a Soviet economist, took the view that technology-driven waves, each lasting approximately 55 years, underpinned the last 200 years of the economic landscape, from power looms and iron making, operating in small factories in small towns, through to transistors and the computer industry operating in everything, basically, large and small factories, workshops, studios located in new industrial regions. Sometime in the 60s, the economic tectonic plates are beginning to move, and by the mid-70s, we get two sets of forces coming together. The economic forces, on the one hand, of powerful overseas competition, and on the other, the emergence of what we might call neoliberalism, based on the writings of Milton Friedman and Hayek and through the practices of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. These particular sets of forces led to two outcomes. One, massive deindustrialization, and secondly, rapid globalization. So over a 40-year period, we've got a manufacturing structure of the British economy which shrank as a share of the British economy from about a third to 11%, and job share even more, from about 35% to 8%. Now, data such as this has led many commentators to conclude that the days of the producer city are over, that we no longer have an economy of making things. And the key descriptor for this state of affairs has become the concept of the post-industrial society. The term is attributed to Daniel Bell from his book of the same name, which came out in 1973. Now, the problem was, of course, that most commentators didn't actually bother reading the book, because he actually didn't say the days of making things are over. In fact, quite the contrary. What he did say is summarized there, that this new society will not displace the older one, just as the previous industrial society did not completely eradicate the agricultural sector of society. To put it in a British context, I don't know what that photograph is doing in there, to be honest with you. One of the things about being an economist is you're not very good on visuals, and therefore I drew in my partner. I said, well, you get some visuals together. There's another example later on, actually. And she forgot to superimpose the damn words on this one. But there you go, there's a visual. That's my explanation for it. British manufacturing is in absolute growth, but in relative decline as a share of GDP, because services have grown more quickly, more rapidly. And therefore there's a tendency to think manufacturing, making things, is on the decline. And jobs are shrinking in manufacturing, largely because of the massive productivity improvements, what we used to call automation. Any well-performing city economy, balanced economy, is going to continue to need a strong representation from manufacturing, because manufacturing is highly tradable, it's important to exports. It has a strong R&D strength, as you can see there, and by and large its jobs are relatively well paid, certainly more than most service sector jobs. However, what we need to remember is that manufacturing is less and less about production. As you can see from the manufacturing value chain there, British manufacturing, and it was explained by John today, is becoming much less about production. Phase 2 in the diagram, sometimes referred to, unfortunately, as metal bashing, and more about the higher value ends of the chain, the science, technology and design at the front end, and the marketing, branding and after sales at the back end. What's really happening is that the line between manufacturing and services is becoming increasingly blurred, and more companies are operating in both areas and bundling goods and services together in customized packages. On the 15th of September 2008, the American government allowed Lehman Brothers to go bankrupt. This, I think, marks the beginning of what I've called here the emerging advanced producer city. Shortly afterwards, of course, Gordon Brown decided to do, quote, whatever it takes to prevent the banks going down. And in so doing, he enacted the biggest regional policy intervention ever in British history. It was regional policy on stilts in favour of London and the South East, and of course paid for by the national economy. We are now in the Great Recession, as I'm sure history will come to refer to these times, and the key question becomes, what will the next urban economy look like? And I'm now going to set out what I've called this manifesto-led identity for the advanced producer city. And it's 10 kind of opinionated comments about what I think this city's going to need to look like from here on. The advanced producer city economy will be driven by internationalization, powered by entrepreneurship and innovation, sustained by diversification, and fueled by low carbon. So the urban economic platform of the future will be international, must be international, must be trading, must be knowledge-based, it must be balanced, and it will be green. So this then is a city economy less defined by what it does and more by the characteristics of its people, its businesses, and its economy. This is another one of those image slip-ups. I was asked by Margaret, my partner, saying, well, what's a good place? I said Florence. And so there it is, but unfortunately, no words. What I want to say here is that the future successful city will continuously seek and will need to fuse together what I've called the two big ideas, the two big urban development ideas of the last 25 years. These being city competitiveness, the notion that cities actually compete, relatively new. You talk about city competition in the early 90s, that's 1990s, and people will be unfamiliar with that idea. What do you mean cities compete? But now it's commonplace. So that's a very, very important driver. We talk regularly of that now. City competitiveness and urban renaissance. The notion that cities need to function well, need to be vibrant, need to be attractive, and even beautiful. We will need to get better and better at securing this genuine fusion of the economic and the physical. And it will help in achieving this fusion by answering the two key questions about the future city. The future city needs to answer these two questions. These are the key questions. Number one, how will this, you've heard this before, how will this city earn its living over the next generation? In other words, what direction should the city economy be moving in post-crisis? And two, what might this look like on the ground, and can we make this look terrific? In effect, we need to build terrific places, whether these be city centres, which is what's going to happen here in Bradford, neighbourhoods, business quarters, around the long-term needs of the city economy. That's very, very important. We don't just do physical things because it seems a good idea, but these physical things need to be anchored and anchor the city around an economic reality. Proposition 3. The advanced producer city should aim to cultivate an outstanding business ecosystem rather than seeking to promote particular industrial sectors, etc. Now remember, RDAs, those of you who can remember those, used to do this, really seriously. Industrial sectors and clusters, particularly clusters and technologies. It's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to predict which economic activities will be important in the future, let alone whether it will be possible to develop them in a particular city. Instead, we need to put in place what I call an outstanding business ecosystem, one that has the right soil and the right climate in which everything has the potential to grow. Industrial policy, the industrial policy is the business of saying which sectors we're going to go after, which clusters we're going to develop, which technologies we're going to support, and so on. In my view, are more appropriate at the national level. It's difficult enough to get a national government to say what this industrial policy is, but in regions and cities, we've got them in spades. So it seems to me to be more appropriate. That's a national issue. Now, from now on, I'm going to refer to this as the Pep Guardiola theory of city economic development. And I'm sorry, it's another football metaphor. For those that hate football, I'm really sorry about this. But even creeping into Urbanism Congress now. But Guardiola is the most sought-after football coach in the world, greatly influenced by his mentor, Johan Cruyff. Guardiola it's kind of developed on the Dutch philosophy of total football. Guardiola has lifted total football to a new plane, whereby in a world-beating team, individual skill levels are very high, all defenders are capable of scoring goals, and all strikers are capable of defending well. In other words, everybody does everything. In effect, industrial strength total football. And by analogy, in the city of the future, it's not about political sectors, in my view, or clusters, or niches. It is everything and anything that can take root in that city. Success depends, at the city level, in getting the key fundamentals in place. Getting them in place and doing them really, really well. It's about more dynamism all round. I know it's not a great rallying cry. More dynamism all round. I don't think I'd get many followers if I went around saying that. That's pretty, sounds pretty bland, but that's it. More dynamism all round. And if more cities did that, we'd be in a pretty good place, I think. The advanced producer city will draw its distinctiveness less from what it makes, which follows up this from 3, more from the power of its history and geography, its DNA, very powerful forces, history and geography, where you come from, who you are, the quality of its assets, its universities and so on. And I think also its leadership regime. At any one time, a leadership regime will set the tone, set the pace, and will give a degree of distinctiveness, whether that is an ambition to be a beautiful city, a terrific place for the under-30s, or the best city, as Barra says, best city in Britain to start a business. There's Florence again. Here we go. A successful competitive city will unashamedly, I thought this needed to be said, in my view, you cannot have anything less of an ambition than to try and be a beautiful city, to be a successful competitive city in the future. It ain't an option, it's just got to happen. Otherwise, skilled and talented people and high-performing businesses will not wish to remain in the city and be attracted to move elsewhere. And to me, the process of regeneration should be a careful and thoughtful one, and perhaps more focus on things like business plans rather than strategies. Perhaps a kind of sign that there's a new placemaking agenda emerging. I don't want to make too much of this, but about shrinking cities, which I think is an issue I haven't read an awful lot about in Britain. Well-performing suburbs. School quality, it seems to me, is now clearly an important part of placemaking. We don't hear it discussed. It's somebody else's business. It's the Department of Education or whatever. Key ingredient in quality placemaking. Inequality. From what we've seen so far, the post-industrial city appears to have a tendency to reinforce the dual city, whereby rich and poor, we're all lamenting the fact that we seem to be getting further and further apart. It's not a new phenomenon. That man, Disraeli, was writing about it in his novel, Sybil, where he talked about the two nations, a long, long time ago. It's still there, but it seems to be getting worse. And, you know, there needs to be probably more outrage about this. But in Britain, there is no doubt we have massively underestimated the debilitating impact of deindustrialization that began in Britain in the 70s. We have massively underestimated it. We don't know how low down we got, and are still haven't fully recovered. We've actually sunk much lower in some places than we ever thought we had. And the socioeconomic scars will take much, much longer to heal. The fact is, over great tracts of Britain, we are still in the process of emerging from one of the great economic transformations of human society, and the dislocation is still real. Can't do a list of 10 things about what's important about the future city without mentioning leadership, because that really should be number one. Leadership is the single most important factor affecting city performance. That is within our control. Most things affecting city performance aren't within our control. Macroeconomic policy, what we do about Europe, what we do about exchange rates to a degree, that's not within our control. We pull small levers at the city level. But one of the things that's within our control is the quality of leadership. And that we can do something about. I mean political, and I mean at officer level, and I mean at public sector level as well, and private sector level. We need to actually take it much more seriously than ever our generation has taken it. We need to train specifically for it. Why not? Train specifically for running a city. Train specifically for doing something very specific within the city. The city is a public good. The city is a public good. And therefore the public sector almost always will need to be the prime mover in city development. And this will require terrific place-leading skills. The advanced producer cities will need to become what I will call real cities. Just over a year ago, during the run-in to the local government elections in Scotland, I initiated one of the worst organised campaigns in urban history. It was for what I call a campaign for real cities. It was modelled, not surprisingly, on the campaign for real ale. There's something special about real ale. Let's get the real stuff. And I thought maybe we could pass that one over into cities and say, let's get some real cities. I said several things, but the one I want to pick out here is that basically, amongst other things, it said that city boundaries should be redrawn to better reflect economic and social realities. Some cities that's important, some very important. Glasgow, for example, vital. Other cities it's probably less so. But we should look at this, in other words, to reflect the growth in the city labour market, housing markets, and growth in mobility. Because city boundaries have become stuck, we have created in some places cities without suburbs. Real cities with bigger footprints will be better placed to address major and previously intransigent problems within their own boundaries. That's key. You can collaborate till the cows come home. If you don't control it, you can't do an awful lot about it in your own time frame. For example, tight boundaries have always helped reinforce high concentrations of poverty in the city. This is amazing. You go to the 1851 census, and it's the same areas of the city where the concentration of poverty was then, and it still is now. Cities need to reflect change. Good one from Scotland here. Devo Max for real cities. Why not? Real cities will need new financial empowerment. In Britain, there is an unfortunate disjunction between, on the one hand, the economic power and importance of cities, and on the other, their legal and financial powerlessness. Cities, therefore, have little power in themselves to affect their own competitiveness. Talk about cities being more competitive, but the tool bag that you've got to do it is so limited. You can't control it. All you can do is stick your chest out a bit more sometimes. And that must change. And I'll leave you with this kind of exciting idea of an attractive vision, I think, of a federal Britain revolving around a Britain of the cities. As you can tell, I'm not Scottish, although I've lived there for over 30 years, but I suspect there's not a lot of regional consciousness, well, not as strong regional consciousness in England as there is certainly in Scotland, certainly in Wales, and certainly in Northern Ireland. But I think there is a real city consciousness here. There's an urban consciousness, and it's very strong and powerful in England. And I think there's something that could be developed from that, rather than just become passive about the whole issue. And finally, a proposition, I think, worthy of the symbolic fact that in this very city of Bradford, exactly 120 years ago this year, I hoped it was going to be this month, but it said January. We went around little Germany and saw where this happened in 1893, but it said January, and I thought, oh God, I wish it had been May. But 120 years ago, this year, in 1893, the Independent Labour Party of Great Britain was founded. And its first chairman, Keir Hardie, was appointed. So this final one is more by way of a prayer than a proposition. I actually do believe that unless something on this scale happens, we are just kind of tinkering with the issue of city competitiveness, provincial city competitiveness, and city wealth creation on any kind of realistic basis. So unless provincial cities find a way of dealing with London and the South East, they will never really improve their economic performance above what I would describe as a current low equilibrium level. It is an extremely centralised country. Only 2 regions out of 12 are richer than the national average. That means that's London and South East. The other 10 average levels are below the national average. So I think we need to we need a commitment to new ways of dispersing economic activity from London to provincial cities. Not just back office, tokenism if you like, but the total function. A comprehensive relocation of national public institutions so that regional cities can conduct national affairs, serving the nation from its cities rather than just London. And they're just playing games there. We've moved the whole of the Home Office to Birmingham. We've moved the whole of the Department of Health to Manchester. Why not energy and climate change to Aberdeen? That's where the big stuff happens. That's where it should be. The Department of Business to Leeds. And I think these are things that we probably should think about. So, we need a genuine dispersal which could form the foundation of a much-needed long-term revitalisation of provincial cities, rather than just a short-term jobs boost, which is what has been in the past. And maybe we could start to develop then a kind of triple helix model of development in the cities involving business, government, including central government, and universities and research centres. And then we start to really develop provincial cities. Thank you very much.